Jake Rodriguez had always been the guy who studied weird space stuff that nobody else cared about, while his friends were getting married and buying houses. He was spending his nights reading research papers about what alien life might look like. His mom used to joke that he'd rather meet a Martian than go on a date. He never thought it would actually happen. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. Jake was in his small office at the university, drinking his third cup of coffee and trying to make sense of some data about possible life on distant planets. His computer screen was full of numbers and charts that would bore most people to tears, but Jake found them fascinating. Then his phone buzzed with a news alert that made him nearly drop his coffee mug. Breaking. Massive ships appear over major cities worldwide. Jake's hand shook as he opened the news app. There they were, enormous silver ships hovering silently over New York, London, Tokyo, and a dozen other cities. They looked nothing like the flying saucers from old movies. These were elegant, almost like giant crystals floating in the sky. The whole world held its breath for 3 days. Military jets circled the ships, but nothing happened. No laser beams, no explosions, no invasion. Just silence. Then, on Friday morning, they spoke. The voice came through every radio, every TV, every phone on the planet at exactly the same time. It was clearly not human. There was something musical about it, like hearing someone speak through water. People of Earth, the voice said, we are the Valdorians. We come in peace, seeking friendship and understanding between our worlds. Jake sat in his office, staring at his computer screen where a live news feed showed one of the beings for the first time. They looked almost human, but taller and more graceful. Their skin had patches that seemed to shimmer like jewels, and their eyes were larger than human eyes, with colors that shifted from blue to purple to silver. We wish to begin cultural exchange, the being continued, to learn from each other and grow together as civilizations. The world went crazy after that. Every news channel ran non-stop coverage. Scientists appeared on talk shows. Religious leaders gave sermons about what this meant for humanity. Social media exploded with theories, jokes, and panic. But Jake just sat there, thinking about all those years he'd spent wondering if we were alone in the universe. Now he knew we weren't, and somehow it felt both amazing and terrifying at the same time. 3 weeks later, Dr. Patricia Chen knocked on his office door. She was the head of his department and had always been tough but fair with Jake. Today, though, she looked nervous. Jake, I need to talk to you about something unusual, she said, closing the door behind her. The Valdorians have made a specific request. Jake looked up from his research notes. What kind of request? Dr. Chen sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They want a young scientist to participate in a cultural exchange program, someone adaptable, intelligent, and she paused, looking uncomfortable. Someone without strong family ties who could be away from Earth for an extended period. Jake felt his stomach drop. His parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. He had no siblings, no girlfriend, and his closest friends were scattered across the country pursuing their own careers. He was exactly the kind of person who could disappear for months without anyone really missing him. They specifically asked for someone who studies extraterrestrial life. Dr. Chen continued. Your name came up immediately. Wait, Jake said, his voice cracking slightly. Are you saying they want me to go with them? Not exactly with them, she replied. They want you to live with one of their people as part of the exchange, to learn about each other's cultures firsthand. Jake's mind raced. This was everything he'd ever dreamed about professionally, but the reality of it was overwhelming. Who would I be living with? Dr. Chen looked even more uncomfortable. That's where it gets interesting. It's not just any Valdorian. It's the daughter of their queen. The next day, Jake found himself on a military transport heading to a secure facility, where he would meet the Valdorian queen herself. He barely slept, spending the night switching between excitement and terror. This was either the opportunity of a lifetime or the biggest mistake he'd ever make. The meeting took place in a room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of metal that shifted colors, and the air hummed with energy from equipment he couldn't begin to understand. Queen Zerathel was nothing like Jake had expected. She was nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that looked like it was embedded with tiny crystals that caught the light. Her presence filled the room in a way that had nothing to do with her size. When she looked at Jake, he felt like she could see right through him. "You are Jake Rodriguez," she said, though her lips didn't move. Her voice appeared directly in his mind, which should have been terrifying but somehow felt natural. "You study life beyond your world." "Yes, Your Majesty," Jake managed to say, hoping that was the right way to address an alien queen. A sound that might have been laughter echoed in his thoughts. "Majesty will do. Though we are less formal than your monarchies, I have a request to make of you, one that is important for both our peoples." She explained that her daughter, Lyraneth, had spent 2 years on Earth studying human culture. Now it was time for her to return to their home world, but the transition was proving difficult. "Lyraneth has always been different," the queen said, and Jake caught something like worry in her mental voice. "Her time among humans has changed her in ways that concern some of our people. I believe having a human companion during her readjustment period would benefit everyone involved." Jake learned that this wasn't just about helping one alien princess. The Valdorians were debating whether contact with humans was good for their civilization. Some of their leaders thought human influence was dangerous and wanted to end all communication with Earth. "If Lyraneth can successfully integrate her experiences with humans into our way of life," the queen explained, "it will prove that our cultures can enrich each other rather than corrupt each other." The weight of responsibility settled on Jake's shoulders like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just a cultural exchange anymore. The future relationship between humans and Valdorians might depend on how well he could help a confused alien princess figure out who she was supposed to be. "I should warn you," Queen Zerathel added, and now Jake definitely heard worry in her mental voice. "My daughter is not what you might expect from a princess. She has developed some very human habits during her time on your world. Prepare yourself for adjustments." Jake agreed to the assignment, driven by curiosity and the knowledge that this opportunity would never come again. But as he left the meeting, the queen's warning echoed in his mind. What exactly had her daughter become during her time on Earth? And what was he getting himself into? Looking back later, Jake would realize that agreeing to live with an alien princess was actually the easy part. The hard part would be everything that came after. The journey to the Valdorian living complex near Jupiter took 3 days on their advanced transport ship. Jake spent most of the time staring out the window at space, trying to wrap his head around the fact that he was actually traveling through the solar system. The stars looked different when you were moving between them, instead of just looking up at them from Earth. The Valdorian pilot, who called himself Commander Velter, was friendly enough but didn't talk much. Jake got the impression that most Valdorians were still figuring out how to interact with humans. They were polite but careful, like they were walking on thin ice. When they finally arrived at the complex orbiting Europa, Jake's jaw dropped. He'd expected some kind of sterile alien laboratory, or maybe a strange crystal palace floating in space. Instead, what he saw looked almost like a luxury apartment building that someone had decided to put in orbit around Jupiter's moon. "This is where Princess Lyraneth has chosen to live," Commander Velter explained as they docked. "She designed it herself based on her studies of human architecture." Jake gathered his suitcases, everything he owned that seemed important enough to bring to space, and followed the commander through airlocks and corridors that looked surprisingly normal. The walls were a soft blue color. There were plants growing in containers along the walkways, and he could even hear what sounded like music coming from somewhere. They stopped in front of a door that looked exactly like the front door of any apartment building on Earth. Commander Velter pressed something that might have been a doorbell, though it made a musical chime instead of a buzz. "Good luck, Jake Rodriguez," the commander said quietly. "The princess is unique." The door opened, and Jake found himself staring at someone who definitely hadn't been in any of his expectations about alien royalty. The girl standing in the doorway was barely over 5 feet tall, which made her short even by human standards and tiny for a Valdorian. She was wearing blue jeans that looked like they came from any store on Earth, sneakers that had definitely seen better days, and a t-shirt with a picture of some band Jake didn't recognize. Her crystalline skin patches, which should have been bright and shimmering according to everything he'd read about Valdorians, were so faded they almost looked like normal human skin with a slight sparkle. "So you're the babysitter," she said in perfect English, with what sounded like a slight American accent. Her tone was flat and definitely not welcoming. Jake blinked. "I'm sorry. What? The babysitter? The keeper? The guy my mother sent to make sure I don't embarrass the royal family any more than I already have." She turned around and walked back into the apartment, leaving the door open behind her. "Come on in, I guess. Welcome to my prison." Jake followed her inside, and his confusion only grew. The apartment looked like it belonged in any city on Earth. There was a couch covered with throw pillows, a coffee table stacked with books and magazines, a kitchen with normal appliances, and even a TV mounted on the wall. The only thing that gave away the fact that they were in space was the huge window that showed Jupiter hanging in the star-filled darkness outside. "I'm Jake," he said, setting his suitcases down near the door, "and I'm not here to babysit anyone. I'm here for cultural exchange. The Princess Lyraneth." He reminded himself, turned around, and gave him a look that suggested she'd heard that line before. "Right, cultural exchange. That's what my mother told you, isn't it?" She walked over to the kitchen and started doing something that looked remarkably like making coffee. "Want some? I know it's not traditionally Valdorian, but I've gotten addicted to the stuff. Probably another thing my mother wants you to fix about me." Jake accepted a cup and took a sip. It was actually pretty good coffee. "Your mother didn't say anything about fixing you. She just said you were having trouble readjusting after spending time on Earth." Lyraneth laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Trouble readjusting. That's one way to put it." She gestured around the apartment. "Does this look like someone who's having trouble with human culture? Because I'd say I've adjusted to it just fine. Maybe too fine for some people's taste." Over the next few hours, Jake began to understand what Queen Zerethel had meant about her daughter being unexpected. Lyraneth wasn't just interested in human culture. She seemed to have completely adopted it. She spoke English more naturally than the Valdorian language, knew more about Earth TV shows than Jake did, and had apparently taught herself to cook human food with varying degrees of success. "Check this out," she said, pulling up something on a tablet that looked like it was made from Valdorian technology, but ran Earth apps. "I've been following this cooking show where they teach you how to make different dishes from around the world. Yesterday I tried to make something called tacos. Want to see how that went?" She led him to the kitchen, where the evidence of her cooking experiment was still visible. There were what might have been tortillas stuck to various surfaces, some kind of filling that had apparently exploded across the counter, and a smell that suggested things had not gone according to plan. "It's harder than it looks on TV," Lyraneth said with a shrug, "but I'm getting better. Last week I actually managed to make pancakes that were almost edible." Jake found himself smiling despite the weird situation. "Why cooking shows?" "I don't know," she said, looking suddenly more serious. "There's something about watching humans create things with their hands, you know? Valdorians don't really cook. We have nutrient synthesizers that just produce whatever our bodies need. But humans, you guys make food into art, into expressions of caring for each other. It's beautiful." That evening, after they'd ordered pizza from a delivery service that apparently existed even in space, Jake started to understand what was really going on. Lyraneth wasn't rebelling against her culture out of spite or teenage attitude. She had discovered aspects of humanity that filled something that had been missing from her life. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said as they sat on the couch, sharing a pizza that was surprisingly normal considering they were eating it in orbit around Jupiter. "Shoot, what's it like being a Valdorian princess? I mean, before you came to Earth, what was your life like?" Lyraneth was quiet for a long moment, staring out at Jupiter's swirling clouds. "Imagine never being alone with your own thoughts," she finally said. "Imagine every decision you make being discussed and approved by a council of people. Who can read your mind? Imagine knowing exactly what you're supposed to do, say, and think for the rest of your very long life. She turned to look at Jake. Valdorians share consciousness. We're connected telepathically to our communities, our families, our leaders. It's supposed to create harmony and prevent conflict, and it works, mostly. But it also means there's no such thing as privacy. No such thing as individual dreams or secret hopes. That sounds. Jake struggled to find the right words. Suffocating? Larineth suggested, yeah, it can be. Don't get me wrong. There are beautiful things about Valdorian culture. The connection we share creates art and music and scientific discoveries that no individual mind could achieve alone. But when I came to Earth and experienced what it was like to have thoughts that were just mine, to make choices without consulting the collective consciousness, it was like learning to breathe for the first time. Jake began to see the real problem. This wasn't about a princess who got too interested in alien culture. This was about someone who discovered a fundamental part of herself that her own culture didn't have room for. So when your mother says you're having trouble readjusting, he began, she means I'm refusing to give up the parts of myself I discovered while I was human. Larineth finished. The parts that think independently, that dream individual dreams, that want to create things with my own hands instead of just channeling the collective will. Later that night, Jake lay in the guest room staring up at the ceiling and thinking about everything Larineth had told him. He was starting to realize that his job here wasn't going to be simple cultural exchange. The Queen had sent him here to help her daughter figure out how to be both Valdorian and individual, how to honor her heritage while keeping the parts of herself she'd discovered among humans. It was a puzzle that might determine the future of relations between two entire civilizations. No pressure at all. In the next room, he could hear Larineth moving around, probably unable to sleep just like him. Tomorrow they'd start figuring out how to navigate this impossible situation together. Tonight, though, Jake just hoped he was smart enough to help solve a problem that seemed to have no clear solution. The first week living with Larineth was like trying to solve a puzzle, where half the pieces kept changing shape. Jake had come expecting to learn about alien culture, but instead he found himself becoming something between a roommate, a therapist, and a bridge between two completely different ways of existing. Their daily routine developed naturally. Mornings were for what Larineth called culture swap time. She would try to teach Jake basic Valdorian language and customs, while he would share stories about Earth and human traditions. It quickly became clear that Jake was the struggling student in these exchanges. No, Larineth would say, laughing, as Jake attempted to pronounce a Valdorian word that seemed to require 3 tongues, and possibly an extra set of lungs. You're thinking about it like human language. Valdorian isn't just sounds. There's an emotional component. You have to feel the meaning, not just say it. Jake would try again, focusing on the feeling behind the word, and sometimes he'd get close enough that Larineth would clap her hands in excitement. Those moments felt like small victories in an impossible class. What surprised Jake was how much Larineth seemed to enjoy teaching him. When she explained Valdorian concepts, her whole demeanor changed. The defensive, slightly bitter attitude she wore like armor would disappear, and he'd catch glimpses of someone who was genuinely proud of her heritage. Valdorian cities aren't built, she explained one morning as they sat by the big window looking out at Jupiter. They're grown. We use a kind of crystal technology that responds to collective thought. When a community needs a new building, everyone focuses their mental energy together, and the crystals form the structure based on their combined vision. That's incredible, Jake said. And he meant it. So every building is like a work of art created by an entire community? Exactly. Larineth's eyes lit up in a way that made her look completely different. And because it's created by collective consciousness, every building perfectly serves the needs of the people who will use it. There's no waste, no poor planning, no buildings that don't fit their environment. But then the light would fade from her eyes, and she'd add something like, of course, it also means there's no room for individual creativity. No one person can ever say I made this because everything is always a group effort. These conversations helped Jake understand why Lyraneth was so drawn to human culture. It wasn't that Valdorian society was bad, it was actually pretty amazing. In a lot of ways. But it left no space for the kind of personal expression and individual achievement that humans took for granted. The afternoons were usually spent with Jake sharing human culture with Lyraneth, though she often knew more about Earth customs than he did. She had somehow managed to absorb 2 years' worth of human experience with an intensity that Jake found both impressive and a little concerning. "Have you ever been to a county fair?" she asked one day while they were making lunch together. She'd gotten much better at cooking over the past week, though Jake had learned to stay alert for flying ingredients. "Yeah, lots of times when I was a kid," Jake replied, stirring what Lyraneth claimed was going to become soup. "Why? I went to one in Iowa during my research mission. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever experienced." She stopped chopping vegetables and stared out the window with a dreamy expression. All these people coming together not because they had to, not because some collective consciousness was directing them, but just because they wanted to. And everyone was doing their own thing, some people showing off animals they'd raised, others selling food they'd made, kids playing games, teenagers trying to impress each other on rides. She turned to Jake with an expression of wonder that made her look much younger than her 127 Valdorian years. It was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. Everyone was there as individuals, but they chose to be part of something bigger. "That's so different from how we do things." Jake nodded, understanding better now why Earth had made such an impact on her. "Valdorian gatherings aren't like that. Valdorian gatherings are perfectly organized," she said, returning to her vegetables with perhaps a bit more force than necessary. "Everyone knows their role, everyone performs it flawlessly, and everything runs smoothly according to the collective plan. It's efficient and harmonious," and she paused, searching for words. "Completely predictable." These afternoon conversations became Jake's favorite part of the day. He started to see Earth through Lyraneth's eyes, all the messy, chaotic, wonderful things about human culture that he'd always taken for granted. The way humans could disagree and still be friends, the way people could fail at something and try again differently, the way individuals could surprise each other and themselves. But it was the evening talks that really brought them together as friends. After dinner, they'd sit on the couch or by the window, and the conversations would get deeper. Lyraneth started opening up about her fears and hopes in ways that Jake suspected she'd never done with anyone before. "Can I tell you something that would probably get me in serious trouble?" "Back home," she asked one night about 3 weeks into Jake's stay. "Of course, sometimes I think about what it would be like to just stay human, to give up being Valdorian altogether and live on Earth as someone completely different." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that terrible? To want to abandon your entire species and culture?" Jake thought carefully before answering. "I don't think it's terrible to want to be yourself, but I also don't think you have to choose between being Valdorian and being individual. Maybe there's a way to be both." "How?" Lyraneth asked, turning to face him. "How can I be part of a collective consciousness when everything I've learned about myself as an individual fights against it?" That's when Lyraneth told Jake the real problem. As the heir to the Valdorian throne, she would eventually need to undergo something called the Great Bonding, a telepathic connection with the most powerful minds in Valdorian society. This connection would allow her to rule effectively, but it required complete mental openness and surrender to the collective will. "The Great Bonding isn't just about becoming queen," she explained. "It's about becoming part of something so much bigger than yourself that your individual thoughts and desires become irrelevant. You become a channel for the collective wisdom of our entire civilization, and you're afraid you won't be able to do it," Jake said. "I'm afraid of what I'll lose if I do it," Lyraneth replied. "All these parts of myself that I discovered while living among humans, my individual thoughts, my personal dreams, my ability to surprise myself. What happens to all of that when my mind becomes part of the collective?" Jake started to understand the weight of what Lyraneth was carrying. This wasn't just about a confused young woman trying to figure out her identity. The future of her entire civilization depended on her ability to successfully bond with the collective consciousness. If she couldn't do it, someone else would have to take her place as heir. What would happen if you couldn't complete the bonding? Jake asked. Lyraneth's expression grew dark. My cousin Kethra would become heir instead. And he believes that contact with humans has been a mistake from the beginning. He thinks human culture is dangerous and corrupting, and that we should end all communication with Earth. Suddenly, Jake realized that his presence here wasn't just about helping one alien princess work through her identity issues. The future relationship between humans and Valdorians might depend on whether Lyraneth could find a way to be both individual and collective, both human-influenced and Valdorian, so no pressure. Jake said, trying to lighten the mood. Lyraneth actually smiled at that. No pressure at all. Just the fate of two civilizations resting on whether I can figure out how to be myself, while also being everyone else. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, looking out at Jupiter's swirling storms. Finally, Jake spoke up. You know what I think? What? I think maybe the fact that you've learned to be an individual doesn't have to be a weakness. In the collective bonding, maybe it could be a strength. Lyraneth looked at him skeptically. How do you figure that? Well, think about it. If everyone in the collective thinks the same way, then the collective can only come up with solutions that fit that way of thinking. But if someone who understands individual perspectives joins the collective, maybe they could help it see possibilities it never considered before. For the first time since Jake had arrived, Lyraneth looked genuinely hopeful. You really think that could work? I think it's worth trying, Jake said. And I think your mother might have sent me here to help you figure out exactly how to make it work. Jake woke up one morning to find Lyraneth standing perfectly still in the middle of the living room. Her eyes closed and her crystalline skin patches glowing brighter than he'd ever seen them. For a moment, he thought something was wrong, but then he realized what was happening. She was receiving a telepathic message. When her eyes opened, all the color had drained from her face. My mother is coming, she said quietly, today, with the Council of Elders. Jake felt his stomach drop. In the 6 weeks he'd been living with Lyraneth, Queen Zerathel hadn't visited once. The princess had mentioned that her mother was giving them space to work things out. But Jake had started to wonder if the queen was avoiding seeing how much her daughter had changed. What does that mean? Jake asked. Though he suspected he already knew. It means they're here to test whether I can still perform the great bonding, Lyraneth said, sinking onto the couch. If I fail, my cousin becomes heir and all contact with Earth gets cut off permanently. The next few hours passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Lyraneth tried to make the apartment look more traditionally Valdorian, hiding her collection of Earth books and switching off the cooking shows that usually played in the background. She changed from her usual jeans and t-shirt into flowing robes that shimmered with the same crystalline patterns as her skin. Do I look Valdorian enough? She asked Jake, and he could hear the fear in her voice. You look like yourself, Jake replied. And that's what matters. When Queen Zerathel arrived with 3 other Valdorians who were clearly important officials, the apartment suddenly felt very small. The queen was just as imposing as Jake remembered. But the council members were even more intimidating. They moved with the kind of perfect coordination that came from shared consciousness, and their mental presence felt like a weight pressing down on the room. Daughter, the queen said aloud, probably for Jake's benefit since he couldn't participate in telepathic communication. Are you prepared for the preliminary bonding assessment? Lyraneth straightened her shoulders. I am, mother. The test itself was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. The council members arranged themselves in a circle around Lyraneth, and suddenly the air in the room seemed to hum with mental energy. Jake couldn't hear or see what was happening, but he could feel it, like being in a room where a conversation was taking place. In a language he couldn't understand, Lyraneth stood in the center of the circle, her eyes closed and her whole body tense with concentration. Her skin patches flickered and dimmed as she struggled to open her mind to the collective consciousness. But something was clearly wrong. Instead of the smooth, harmonious connection that Jake assumed was supposed to happen, there seemed to be Some kind of resistance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The test ended abruptly. The council members stepped back, and Lyraneth swayed on her feet like someone who'd just run a marathon. The disappointment on Queen Zarathel's face was obvious, even though she tried to hide it. The council members whispered among themselves in rapid Valdorian before departing without another word. Jake got the distinct impression that the test had not gone well. After they left, Lyraneth collapsed onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. "I couldn't do it," she said, her voice muffled. "Every time I tried to open my mind to theirs, all these human thoughts and feelings got in the way. It was like trying to join a conversation when you're speaking a different language." Jake sat down beside her, wishing he knew how to help. Maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing. How can it not be bad? Lyraneth looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I just proved that spending time with humans has made me unfit to rule my own people." Before Jake could answer, Queen Zarathel returned, alone this time. She looked tired in a way that Jake hadn't seen before, and when she spoke, her mental voice carried a heaviness that made Jake's heart ache. Even though the words weren't directed at him, "We need to talk," she said to both of them. "Both of you. And I need to tell you some things that I should have explained from the beginning." The queen sat down across from them, and for the first time, she looked more like a worried mother than an imposing alien ruler. "Jake," she said, focusing her attention on him, "I brought you here under false pretenses." This was never just about cultural exchange. Jake had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. What was it really about? It was about saving my daughter's future, and possibly the future of both our civilizations. The queen replied. Lyraneth's time among humans wasn't just research. It was a test to see if she could function outside the rigid structure of traditional Valdorian society. She explained that Valdorian civilization was at a crossroads. Contact with humanity had introduced new ideas about individuality, creativity, and personal growth that many Valdorians found both fascinating and terrifying. "There are factions within our society that see human influence as dangerous," the queen continued. "They believe that individual consciousness weakens the collective, and that exposure to human culture will destroy everything we've built over millennia. And there are other factions that think contact with humans could help us grow and evolve." Lyraneth added, beginning to understand where this was going. "Exactly," her mother confirmed. "I belong to the second group. I believe that our civilization has become too rigid, too predictable. We've achieved harmony, but we've lost the ability to adapt and change. Contact with humanity could teach us how to maintain our collective strength while also allowing for individual growth." Jake felt the pieces clicking into place. So Lyraneth's ability to integrate human and Valdorian traits isn't just about her personal future. It's about proving that the two cultures can coexist and strengthen each other. "Yes," the queen said, "but today's failed test has given ammunition to those who want to end all contact with Earth. They're now pushing for Lyraneth to be removed from succession and replaced with her cousin Kethril." "Let me guess," Jake said grimly. "Kethril belongs to the faction that thinks humans are dangerous. He believes that all contact with Earth should be severed immediately," the queen confirmed. "If he becomes heir, your people will never hear from ours again." The weight of responsibility that Jake had been feeling suddenly became crushing. Not only was Lyraneth's personal future at stake, but the entire relationship between humans and Valdorians hung in the balance. "There will be one more test," Queen Zarathel said. "A final bonding ceremony that will determine Lyraneth's fitness to rule. It will take place on Valdor Prime in front of the entire High Council." "When?" Lyraneth asked quietly. "In 2 weeks." "And Jake?" The queen turned to him with an expression that was both hopeful and desperate. "I'm formally requesting that you accompany my daughter to Valdor Prime. You would be the first human ever to set foot on our homeworld." Jake looked back and forth between the queen and Lyraneth, understanding that this was probably the most important decision he'd ever make in his life. If Lyraneth failed the final test, it wouldn't just mean the end of her dreams. It could mean the end of humanity's relationship with an advanced alien civilization. But as he looked at Lyraneth, sitting there in her traditional robes but still somehow managing to look more human than Valdorian, Jake realized that his choice had been made weeks ago. "Of course I'll come," he said. "We're going to figure out how to make this work." For the first time in days, Lyraneth smiled. "You really think we can?" "I think," Jake said, "that maybe the fact that you can think like both a human and a Valdorian isn't a weakness at all. Maybe it's exactly what your people need, even if they don't realize it yet." The queen looked between them with something that might have been hope. "2 weeks," she said. 2 weeks to prepare for a test that will determine the future of 2 worlds. No pressure at all. The journey to Valdor Prime took 5 days, and Jake spent most of it trying not to think about the fact that he was about to become the first human ever to visit an alien homeworld. The responsibility felt enormous, not just for Lyraneth's future, but for what his presence there would represent for all of humanity. Lyraneth was quieter than usual during the trip, spending long hours in meditation as she prepared for the final bonding ceremony. Sometimes Jake would find her standing at the observation windows, staring out at the strange stars of a different part of the galaxy, and he wondered what she was thinking about. "Are you nervous?" he asked her one evening as they shared dinner in the ship's dining area. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also hopeful for the first time. I feel like maybe there's a way to be both things, individual and collective, human influenced and Valdorian. These past 2 weeks, working with you to figure out a new approach to the bonding, it's made me realize that I don't have to choose between the parts of myself." They had spent those 2 weeks developing what they call the bridge approach to telepathic bonding. Instead of trying to suppress her human-influenced individual consciousness, Lyraneth would attempt to maintain it while connecting to the collective, essentially arguing that diversity of thought could strengthen rather than weaken their shared mental network. It was a risky strategy that had never been attempted before, but it felt right to both of them. When Valdor Prime finally came into view, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The planet looked like someone had taken Earth and replaced all the cities with living crystals. Massive spires of what looked like colored glass rose from the surface, connected by bridges that seemed to float in midair. Everything glowed with soft, shifting colors that pulsed in patterns Jake somehow knew represented the collective thoughts of millions of minds working together. "It's beautiful," Jake whispered. "It's home," Lyraneth replied, but her voice carried a mixture of love and sadness that Jake understood completely. The landing ceremony was unlike anything Jake could have imagined. Thousands of Valdorians gathered to witness the arrival of the first human on their world, their collective curiosity creating a mental hum that Jake could almost feel, even though he couldn't participate in their telepathic network. Queen Zerethel met them at the landing platform, dressed in robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. "Welcome to Valdor Prime, Jake Rodriguez," she said formally. "You honor us with your presence." But Jake could see the worry in her eyes. In the 2 weeks since the failed preliminary test, political pressure had been building. Kethral's faction had grown stronger, and many Valdorians now believed that contact with humans was indeed dangerous to their way of life. The final bonding ceremony was scheduled for the next day, to be held in the Crystal Amphitheater at the heart of the capital city. Jake was given quarters in the royal palace, a structure that seemed to grow and reshape itself based on the needs of its inhabitants, and spent the night trying to calm his nerves. The morning of the ceremony, Lyraneth came to his room looking more nervous than Jake had ever seen her. "What if this doesn't work?" she asked. "What if I've been fooling myself, and human influence really has made me unfit to rule?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," Jake replied. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think you're about to show your people something they've never seen before. What it looks like when someone can be both individual and collective at the same time." The Crystal Amphitheater was packed with thousands of Valdorians, their collective mental energy creating an almost overwhelming atmosphere of anticipation. Jake sat in a special section reserved for honored guests, acutely aware that every eye in the place was on him at some point. He was a curiosity, a representative of the species that had supposedly corrupted their princess. The High Council took their positions around the ceremonial platform, 12 of the most powerful telepathic minds in Valdorian civilization. Kethril was among them, and Jake could see the confidence in his posture. He clearly expected Lyraneth to fail again, which would clear his path to the throne and allow him to end all contact with Earth. When Lyraneth entered the amphitheater, a hush fell over the crowd. She was dressed in traditional ceremonial robes, but she moved with a confidence that Jake recognized from their weeks together. This wasn't the uncertain, conflicted person who had failed the preliminary test. This was someone who had figured out who she was and was ready to prove it. The ceremony began with ancient chants that created harmonics in the crystal structure of the amphitheater itself. Jake watched in amazement as the walls began to glow and pulse in rhythm with the collective voices of thousands of Valdorians. Then came the moment of the bonding itself. Lyraneth stood in the center of the platform as the High Council members arranged themselves around her. The air began to hum with telepathic energy, and Jake could feel the mental pressure even though he couldn't participate in it. But this time was different. Instead of struggling against her individual consciousness, Lyraneth embraced it. She opened her mind to the collective while maintaining her sense of self, creating something that had never existed before in Valdorian history, a bridge between individual and collective consciousness. Jake watched in wonder as the crystal amphitheater began to pulse with new patterns of light. The collective consciousness wasn't being weakened by Lyraneth's individuality. It was being enhanced by it. Her unique perspective, shaped by her time among humans, was creating new pathways of thought and possibility within the shared mental network. The change was so dramatic that even Jake could feel it. The mental atmosphere in the amphitheater shifted from rigid harmony to something more dynamic and alive. It was like the difference between a perfectly tuned orchestra and a jazz ensemble, both beautiful, but one allowing for improvisation and surprise. The High Council members' expressions changed from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. Kethril's confident posture crumbled as he realized that everything he believed about human info, once being corrupting, was being proven wrong in front of thousands of witnesses. When the bonding was complete, Lyraneth opened her eyes and smiled. The collective consciousness hadn't consumed her individuality. It had been enriched by it. She was still herself, but she was also connected to her people in a way that was stronger and more flexible than any bonding in Valdorian history. Queen Zerthel stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried both relief and triumph. "The bonding is successful," she announced to the crowd. "But more than that, it is revolutionary. My daughter has shown us a new way forward, one that honors both our collective traditions and the individual growth that contact with humanity has taught us." The crowd's reaction was like nothing Jake had ever experienced. The collective joy and excitement of thousands of telepathically connected minds created a wave of emotion so powerful that Jake felt tears running down his face, even though the feelings weren't his own. Later, at the celebration feast, Queen Zerthel made another announcement that shocked everyone present. "Today we have witnessed the beginning of a new era," she said. "An era in which Valdorian civilization can grow and adapt while maintaining our core values. To commemorate this moment, I'm creating a new position, Human Cultural Liaison to the Valdorian Court. Jake Rodriguez, if you are willing, you would be the first to hold this position." Jake looked around the great hall, filled with alien beings who were no longer quite so alien to him, and realized that his life had just taken another impossible turn. "I would be honored," he said. Lyraneth, now confirmed as heir and wearing a crown that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight, leaned over to whisper in his ear. "So, still think this is just cultural exchange?" Jake laughed. "I'm starting to think that was never what this was about." "No," she agreed, smiling. "This was always about family. It just took us a while to figure that out." As Jake looked around the celebration, watching Valdorians and the small group of human diplomats who had arrived for the ceremony mingling together, he realized that Lyraneth was right. Somewhere along the way, this had stopped being about two different species trying to understand each other and had become about creating something new together. He had come to space expecting to study alien culture from the outside. Instead, he had become part of a family that spanned two worlds and helped create a future where different didn't mean dangerous. It just meant more possibilities. The alien queen had ordered him to live with her daughter, and he definitely hadn't been expecting this. But as he watched Larineth laugh with her mother while wearing both a crystal crown and the earth-band T-shirt she'd put on under her ceremonial robes, Jake couldn't imagine wanting to be anywhere else. Sometimes the best adventures were the ones you never saw coming.